The first thing I remember was Daniel's face, pale, furious, and whispering through clenched teeth. "You're 17 minutes late, Anna, 17. That's how it began, the most humiliating, miraculous night of my life. The night I walked into a mansion expecting judgment and instead walked out having learned the one lesson I had spent my whole life trying to teach others. But before that moment, before the marble floors and the furious whispers, there was a simple email that changed everything. It arrived on a gray Wednesday afternoon while I was finishing up paperwork at the nonprofit where I worked. The subject line read, "Formal dinner invitation. Attendance required." For a second I thought it was spam, but then I saw the sender Huxley and Reeves attorneys at law. I remember staring at it, the hum of the office fading into silence. The email wasn't just an invitation, it was a summons. A single cold paragraph said that Mrs. Margaret Huxley Daniel's mother requests the presence of her son and his companion, Ms. Anna Walker, for a formal dinner at her private residence. No RSVP, no warmth, just a command from a woman whose approval could apparently decide the fate of my relationship. Daniel had warned me. "My mother doesn't do casual," he'd said. "With her, everything's a test." He said it like a man who had spent his life walking through invisible minefields, terrified of setting one off. That night, over takeout and lukewarm coffee, he handed me a printed list, actual rules for surviving the dinner. "Don't talk about your job at the nonprofit. She thinks charity is for people who fail in business. Don't mention your parents, they're too ordinary. Stick to neutral topics, art, history, maybe economics. Be exactly on time, not early, not late. Wear the navy dress I bought you, and the scarf, always the scarf." He said scarf like it was armor, like that thin cashmere fabric could shield me from her judgment. I tried to laugh it off, but his eyes told me he wasn't joking. For 2 years, Daniel had carried both love and fear, love for me, fear of his mother. He'd told me stories about her sharp tongue, how she'd reduced business partners to stammers with a single glance. "She doesn't just judge character," he said, "she dissects it." The week before the dinner was a fog of anxiety. I worked my usual hours visiting local veterans' shelters, checking in on elderly residents, but my mind was elsewhere. Every mirror became a courtroom. Every outfit felt like a potential mistake. I loved my job at Connect Hope, a small nonprofit in Hartford that helped struggling families and veterans find stable housing. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. I'd seen more grace in the eyes of a man who'd lost everything than in the ballroom smiles of the rich. Still, I knew Margaret wouldn't see it that way. By Friday afternoon, I had everything planned down to the minute: train at 3:45, taxi at 4:35, arrival at 4:50 sharp, dinner at 5:00. I even printed directions in case my phone died. I pressed my navy dress, polished my shoes, and wrapped the scarf carefully around my neck. It was soft, expensive, and utterly unlike me. Daniel had said his mother would appreciate the detail. I wanted to tell him she might appreciate a person who worked for people who didn't own scarves, but I swallowed the thought. When I looked at myself in the mirror before leaving, I barely recognized the woman staring back. Everything was neat, perfect, calculated. But beneath that polished shell, my stomach twisted in silent rebellion. I caught the 3:45 train, my heart pounding with every stop. Through the window, the Connecticut countryside blurred into a wash of gold and green. I tried to steady my breath. "It's just dinner," I told myself. Just dinner. I reached the small suburban station with 15 minutes to spare. The air was crisp, the kind that smells faintly of wood smoke and cut grass. A taxi was waiting, but for some reason I didn't get in. I needed a minute to breathe, to walk, to think, to feel something other than dread. So I started walking toward the estate. The neighborhood was like another world, tree-lined avenues, wrought iron gates, and lawns so wide they could fit my entire apartment building. I clutched the bouquet I'd bought for Margaret, white lilies, understated but elegant. 10 minutes into the walk, I passed a small grocery store at the corner of Main and Ash. In the window, a display of pumpkins and Thanksgiving flyers made the world seem simpler, kinder. I realized I'd forgotten a gift bag for the flowers, so I ducked inside, hoping to find one. The line was slow, the air filled with the soft beep of scanners and the shuffle of carts. That's when I noticed her, an elderly woman at the front, fumbling through her purse, apologizing as coins spilled onto the counter. The cashier's tone was sharp. "Ma'am, you're short. It's $147.86 total." The woman's voice trembled. I thought my card would cover it. The people behind her sighed, shifting impatiently. I looked at my watch, 4:44. I could still make it if I hurried. Then I looked back at her. Her hands were shaking. She wore a faded coat and shoes that had seen too many winters. Her eyes, tired but gentle, met mine for just a second. Something inside me cracked. I didn't think. I just stepped forward. "It's okay," I said quietly. "I'll cover it." The woman froze. "Oh, no, dear, you can't. It's fine," I insisted. "Please." The cashier swiped my card before she could argue. $152. The woman looked at me, bewildered, tears forming in the corners of her eyes. "People don't do that anymore," she whispered. I smiled. They should. I handed her the receipt and stepped aside, suddenly aware of the time. 4:49. My heart leapt. I was officially late. I rushed out of the store, bouquet and handscarf fluttering in the autumn wind, unaware that my small act of kindness had just rewritten the story of my life. If there's one thing I've learned from working in community outreach, it's that plans mean nothing when life decides to test your values. And that afternoon, life decided to test mine in the middle of a grocery store. The clock on my phone read 4:41 p.m. I was still confident I could make it to the Huxley estate on time. The station was barely a mile away, and the fall air felt cool against my nerves. I'd just bought a small bouquet of lilies, a peace offering I hoped for the formidable woman I was about to meet. As I walked, the world around me looked too perfect to be real. White fences, manicured lawns, and mailboxes shaped like miniature mansions. Even the breeze smelled expensive. But under the calm surface, my thoughts churned like a storm. Every sentence Daniel had said that week replayed in my head. She hates tardiness. Never talk about charity. Everything's a test. I kept repeating those rules like prayer beads, hoping they'd protect me. That's when I saw the small grocery store, a local chain called Hearth and Home Market, its windows filled with pumpkin pies and Thanksgiving decorations. I noticed a rack of gift bags by the door and remembered the bouquet in my hand. "A gift looks naked without a bag," my mother used to say. So I went in. The store was warm, bright, and humming with the quiet rhythm of ordinary life: cartwheels, squeaking registers, beeping a radio, playing a soft country song. It was a world away from the marble halls I was about to step into. I found a simple silver gift bag, paid, and was about to leave when I heard a voice ahead of me, soft, apologetic, and trembling. "I'm sorry, dear, I thought my card would go through." At the checkout counter, an elderly woman stood clutching a few grocery items: milk, bread, apples, a small frozen turkey. The cashier's expression was tight, rehearsed in impatience. "Ma'am, it's $147.86, he said flatly. "You're short." The woman opened her worn wallet again, fingers shaking. She glanced around, embarrassed, whispering, I can put something back." The line behind her shifted, murmuring. Someone sighed loudly. I froze. My pulse quickened, not from judgment but recognition. I'd seen this scene too many times at work, the quiet desperation of someone choosing between pride and hunger. My instincts screamed to help, but Daniel's voice cut through like a blade. "Don't be late, don't look weak, she'll never forgive it." I glanced at my phone. 4:46. I had 14 minutes. 14 minutes to protect my future or my humanity. My hand tightened on the bouquet. My stomach churned. I could feel the old reflex compassion wrestling with the new one, fear of judgment. Then I looked at her face. Not the trembling hands, not the worn coat, her eyes. Clear, faded blue like the sky before dusk. There was quiet dignity there. She wasn't begging. She was just tired of being unseen. That did it. I stepped forward. "It's okay," I said softly, pulling out my card. "I'll cover it." The cashier blinked, surprised. The woman gasped. No, dear, I can't let you." "It's fine," I said, smiling. "We all need a hand sometimes." The cashier shrugged, swiped the card, and said, "Approved." $150.12. The woman turned toward me, her voice breaking. "You don't even know me." "I don't need to," I said. She reached out and squeezed my hand. Her skin was cool, her grip trembling. "People don't usually notice anymore," she whispered. "Thank you." I nodded, throat tight. "Take care of yourself, ma'am." Outside, the sun had dipped lower, the air crisp with evening chill. I glanced at my phone, 4:52. Panic hit. I was late, really late. I broke into a near run down the quiet street, the bouquet pressed against my chest scarf fluttering behind me. The irony wasn't lost on me. I worked every day to teach compassion, and the first time I lived it for myself, it could cost me everything. But some part of me felt strangely calm, like something inside had finally aligned. The walk to the estate grew surreal, tall oak trees casting long shadows, the hum of distant traffic fading into silence. I could see the mansion gates ahead, wrought iron and gold, gleaming like a judgment. For a fleeting moment, doubt clawed at me. What if Daniel was right? What if his mother saw me as another soft-hearted fool, a charity case in heels? But then I thought of the woman's eyes, the way they softened when I paid her bill, the way kindness briefly thawed her embarrassment. I adjusted my scarf, lifted my chin, and walked on. The driveway to the Huxley estate stretched endlessly ahead, flanked by towering hedges and marble statues that seemed to watch my every step. The air grew colder, sharper, filled with the smell of pine and wealth. When I reached the steps, Daniel was pacing outside, checking his watch. He looked up and froze when he saw me. His expression shifted from relief to fury in an instant. "Anna, what took you so long?" I tried to catch my breath. I walked. There was a woman at the store. He cut me off. "You're late. Do you have any idea what this means?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My scarf slipped slightly from my shoulders as he looked me over, exasperated. "You're flustered," he said. "And where's the scarf I told you to wear?" I blinked, confused, then realized I'd wrapped it around the old woman's shoulders outside the store when I left. "I gave it away," I said quietly. She was cold. Daniel's face twisted. "You gave away a $700 scarf to a stranger before meeting my mother." I felt the sting of his tone, but underneath it I saw something else, fear. Fear of disapproval, fear of not measuring up. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "I just couldn't walk past her." He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "You don't understand, Anna. My mother doesn't forgive mistakes. And you're walking in late, missing the one thing that made you look respectable." His words cut deep, but something in me resisted bending this time. If helping someone made me unrespectable, then maybe I was okay with that. I followed him up the steps, heart-pounding bouquet trembling slightly in my hand. The great oak doors loomed ahead, polished to perfection. As the butler opened them, I caught my reflection in the glass. No longer the perfect woman Daniel had trained for presentation, but someone who had chosen kindness over convenience. And somewhere deep down I hoped that choice still meant something in this world. Daniel's fingers tightened around my wrist as the butler disappeared down the corridor, his voice low but sharp enough to cut. 17 minutes, Anna. Do you have any idea what you've done?" The echo of his words bounced off the marble foyer, mingling with the soft tick of an antique clock somewhere deep in the house. I could smell polish money and fear, the kind that didn't come from danger, but from disappointing power. "I told you she judges everything," Daniel hissed. "The first impression is everything to her. You might as well have walked in barefoot." I opened my mouth to explain, but he didn't give me the chance. "And where's the scarf? Don't tell me." I hesitated, clutching the bouquet closer. I gave it to someone who needed it more. His eyes widened as if I'd confessed to a crime, a stranger on the street. "You're unbelievable." "Daniel," I began carefully. She was freezing. I couldn't just... "You could have thought for once, this isn't one of your charity cases, Anna. This is my mother." The words stung, not just their cruelty, but the truth they revealed. Somewhere along the way, Daniel had stopped seeing kindness as strength. He saw it as weakness, something to hide, to apologize for. I looked at him, really looked, and saw the frightened boy behind the expensive suit, the man who'd spent his life trying to please someone who never smiled. "I'm sorry," I said quietly, "but if your mother can't forgive me for being late because I helped someone, then maybe this dinner says more about her than about me." He flinched. Don't say that, Anna. Please, just let me do the talking tonight." The butler reappeared. "Mrs. Huxley will see you now." The words carried the weight of a verdict. We followed him through a corridor lined with portraits, stern men, elegant women, all painted with the same cold, watchful eyes. Each step I took echoed louder than the last. I felt like an intruder in a museum of judgment. The dining room doors opened soundlessly. It was like stepping into another century. A chandelier glimmered above a long mahogany table set for three. The silverware gleamed. A fire burned low in the marble hearth, more for atmosphere than warmth. And at the far end of the table sat her, Margaret Huxley. She was older than I'd imagined, late 60s perhaps, but striking. Silver hair in an immaculate twist posture, ramrod straight eyes, a pale, piercing gray. She looked carved from the same stone as the mansion itself. Her gaze flicked from Daniel to me, assessing, calculating. I expected cold disapproval, maybe a polite smile, but what I saw made my stomach drop. Recognition. For a split second her expression softened so quickly I almost thought I imagined it. But then she looked away, hiding something behind that perfect composure. Mother, Daniel said, forcing cheerfulness, "This is Anna Walker." Mrs. Huxley nodded, once her voice calm but clipped. "Miss Walker, I've heard a great deal about you." Her tone made a great deal sound like an indictment. "Thank you for having me, Mrs. Huxley." My voice was steady, even though my hands weren't. "It's an honor." We sat. The butler poured wine, the kind that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I reached for my napkin and froze. There, resting across the back of Mrs. Huxley's chair, was something I recognized instantly. My scarf. The same navy cashmere scarf I'd given to the woman outside the grocery store an hour earlier. It couldn't be. My mind scrambled for logic. Maybe she'd bought the same one. Maybe it was coincidence. But no, the frayed corner, the small snag in the weave where it had caught on my bracelet, it was mine. I must have gone pale because Daniel frowned at me. "Anna." "I'm fine," I whispered, eyes still fixed on the scarf. Mrs. Huxley noticed my stare. Slowly she adjusted the fabric around her shoulders, her lips curving in what almost looked like a smile. "Chilly night," she said casually. "Yes, I managed, it is." Dinner began in silence, punctuated only by the soft clink of silverware and the butler's quiet footsteps. The food looked exquisite, roasted duck, delicate greens, but I couldn't taste a thing. Every sense was tangled in confusion. Had she been the woman at the store? The tremor in her hands, the same soft rasp in her voice, it all aligned, and yet it was impossible. Why would a millionaire pretend to be someone she wasn't? Margaret studied me over her glass eyes, unreadable. "Daniel tells me you work in community outreach." "Yes, ma'am," I said, careful to keep my voice even. "We help families in need. Veterans mostly, people who've fallen through the cracks." "A noble cause," she said coolly, "though I've always believed charity works best when people learn to help themselves." I smiled faintly. Sometimes they just need a little warmth to start with. Her gaze sharpened just slightly. "Warmth," she repeated. "Yes. A rare commodity these days." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Daniel tried to steer the conversation to safer ground, real estate market trends, but his mother barely responded. Her attention stayed on me, quiet and unwavering. By dessert, my nerves were frayed. I'd never been so aware of my every word, every movement. The only thing keeping me grounded was that scarf, its soft folds resting like a secret between us. When the butler cleared the plates, Mrs. Huxley placed her hands on the table, her rings catching the light. "Miss Walker," she said, "I imagine this evening has been rather stressful for you." "Yes, ma'am," I admitted, a little. She nodded slowly. "I find that people reveal who they are under pressure. Wouldn't you agree?" I swallowed hard. I suppose so. Her eyes softened again, just a flicker gone as quickly as it appeared. Good, because tonight, my dear, is only the beginning. I didn't yet know what she meant, but the quiet way she said it chilled me more than any threat could. The moment Mrs. Huxley said, "Tonight is only the beginning," the chandelier's crystals caught the firelight and scattered it like broken glass. I could feel Daniel's tension radiating beside me, a constant vibration of fear that made even breathing feel like a mistake. The butler cleared the plates, and the click of silver on porcelain sounded like the closing of a courtroom door. Mrs. Huxley rose from her chair with slow precision, the scarf falling lightly across her shoulders. "Come," she said, motioning toward the adjoining parlor. "We'll take our coffee by the fire." Her tone made it clear it wasn't a suggestion. The parlor was magnificent walls lined with oil paintings, shelves of leather-bound books, and a grand piano that looked untouched. The smell of polish and old money filled the air. She gestured for me to sit on the velvet sofa. Daniel perched stiffly beside me, hands folded like a reprimanded child. I understand she began you work for a charity organization? The word charity lingered in her mouth as if she were tasting something slightly sour. Yes, ma'am, I said. We help struggling families, mostly veterans. Ah, she said, stirring her coffee slowly. People who've made poor choices, I assume. I swallowed, keeping my tone polite. Some have, others simply had bad luck. Her eyes met mine, sharp, intelligent, and oddly familiar. And you think kindness can fix them? I think kindness is the only thing that ever does, I said before I could stop myself. Daniel's heel pressed discreetly against mine, a warning, but Mrs. Huxley merely smiled faintly, almost to herself. You're idealistic, she murmured. Idealism is dangerous in this family. The fire popped, sending a spark up the chimney. I studied her face in the light. The resemblance to the woman in the grocery store was undeniable now, the delicate hands, the faint tremor, the same softness behind the steel. Every instinct screamed that it was her. Yet why would she have been there testing me like some character from a fable? The silence stretched. Finally, she said, Do you believe in fate, Miss Walker? I'm not sure, I admitted. I believe people cross paths for a reason. Her lips curved. So do I. Daniel jumped in quickly, desperate to redirect. Mother Anna brought you something. He snatched the bouquet from the side table and handed it to her like a peace offering. White lilies, your favorite. Mrs. Huxley accepted them with a nod, then set them down without smelling them. Lovely, she said absently. Daniel, dear, would you fetch another bottle of wine? The cellar door is just off the hall. He hesitated. Mother, That wasn't a request, she said, eyes never leaving me. When he left, the room felt suddenly smaller. The fire hissed softly. She turned toward me, fully folding her hands in her lap. Tell me, Anna, she said, voice quiet but commanding, what did you do on your way here? My heart stuttered. Excuse me. You stopped somewhere. Her gaze didn't waver. A store, perhaps. My pulse quickened. I did. I needed a gift bag. And she pressed gently like a surgeon asking for truth. I hesitated. There was no reason to lie, yet something in her tone warned that this was a trap. There was an elderly woman, I said finally. She couldn't pay for her groceries, so I helped her. Mrs. Huxley's eyes softened. Helped her, she repeated. You mean you paid? Yes, $150. She nodded slowly, the faintest flicker of satisfaction crossing her face. That's a great deal of money for a stranger. It didn't feel like a choice, I said quietly. Most good deeds don't, she replied. The door opened. Daniel returned a bottle, trembling slightly in his grip. Here it is, he said, forcing a smile. Mrs. Huxley stood. Thank you, dear. Pour for us, will you? As he bent to the task, she turned back to me. Anna, do you know what I admire most in people? I shook my head. Consistency, she said. The way someone behaves when no one important is watching. Daniel chuckled awkwardly. Mother, I'm sure Anna... Quiet, Daniel, she said sharply. The air seemed to freeze. You told me she was late. His face flushed. Yes, but it wasn't. Late because she stopped to help a stranger, she finished for him, her gaze never leaving mine. Did you tell her that part? Daniel stared at her, confusion flooding his face. How did you... I was there, she said simply. I was the woman at the store. The room fell silent. I could hear only the soft crackle of the fire and the distant tick of the grandfather clock. Daniel blinked, uncomprehending. What are you talking about? She turned, slightly adjusting the scarf around her shoulders, the same navy scarf I'd given away hours earlier. I wanted to see what kind of person my son was marrying. And now I know. I sat, frozen words tangled in my throat. Mrs. Huxley continued, her voice steady but laced with something almost tender. You didn't know who I was yet. You gave what little you had without hesitation. You failed my son's test of punctuality, Miss Walker. But you passed mine. Daniel's mouth fell open. You set her up. I observed, she corrected calmly. And I learned more in 10 minutes than you've shown me in 35 years. He turned pale, lowering his gaze to the floor. Mrs. Huxley looked back at me. Kindness is rare among the ambitious. Don't ever let anyone convince you it's weakness. Her words washed over me like warm light breaking through a storm. For the first time all evening I felt seen, not as someone being judged, but as someone understood. "Thank you," I whispered. She smiled, a real one this time. "No, my dear, thank you. Now shall we have dinner properly?" I nodded, still trembling slightly, and followed her back toward the long table that gleamed like a mirror. Behind us, Daniel trailed in silence, the sound of his footsteps small and uncertain on the marble floor. The night had only begun, but I already sensed it would end very differently from how any of us had imagined. Daniel's knuckles whitened around his wineglass. He looked from his mother to me, speechless, as if his entire understanding of the evening had just collapsed. For a moment none of us spoke. Only the faint crackle of the fire and the ticking of the grandfather clock filled the silence. Mrs. Huxley, no Margaret as I now thought of her, remained perfectly composed. She looked almost serene, her eyes glimmering with something between amusement and vindication. "I wanted to see who my son was marrying," she said, "and I wanted to see who you were when no one was watching." Daniel's jaw clenched. "So you disguised yourself, you mother? That's insane." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Is it? I've spent my life surrounded by people who smile when I enter a room and gossip the moment I leave it. You can't imagine the masks I've seen, Daniel. So yes, I sometimes prefer to meet people when they believe I'm nobody at all." I sat frozen, every heartbeat loud in my ears. My scarf, my small ordinary scarf, still draped across her shoulders like a crown. The woman I'd pitied in the store had never needed my help, but somehow she'd still been testing me. Margaret turned to me again. "Tell me, Anna, why did you do it? You didn't know who I was." I hesitated, searching for words that didn't sound rehearsed. "Because she looked like she needed help," I said finally, "and because it didn't cost me anything that mattered." Her lips twitched the faintest smile. You'd be surprised how many people can't say the same. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, his voice trembling. "Mother, this is cruel. You made her feel like she failed." "She didn't fail," Margaret interrupted. "She passed. You failed, Daniel. You let fear make you cruel. You taught her to hide her goodness when you should have been proud of it." His face flushed red, a mix of shame and anger. "That's not fair." "Oh, it's perfectly fair," she said, her tone soft but cutting. "You've spent your whole life trying to impress me with perfection when all I ever wanted was sincerity." The air thickened. I could feel Daniel shrinking beside me, retreating behind his silence. But I couldn't look away from her. There was no malice in her eyes now, only truth. Margaret sighed, as if releasing years of disappointment. "You remind me of someone," she said to me quietly. "My husband. Before the money, before the power. He believed in people. He used to say, 'Kindness is the only investment that never loses value.' I suppose I wanted to see if anyone still lived by that rule. I swallowed hard. I didn't mean to pass or fail anything I said. I just couldn't walk past her." "That's exactly why you passed." Her gaze softened even more, and for the first time I saw the warmth Daniel must have known as a child, before wealth hardened it out of reach. The butler entered, discreetly refilling glasses, but the tension in the room was unmistakable. When he left, Margaret stood again, lifting the scarf from her shoulders. She folded it neatly, then placed it on the table in front of me. "This is yours," she said. "I believe it belongs to the right person now." I looked at it, still warm from her skin, and whispered, "You didn't have to." She shook her head. "Yes, I did. Because tonight wasn't about you meeting me. It was about me meeting you." Daniel slumped in his chair, his voice barely audible. "So what happens now? You just forgive her lateness and pretend everything's fine." Margaret's eyes flashed. "Forgive her? I should thank her. She reminded me what decency looks like, something I fear I nearly forgot." Daniel exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. "I can't believe this." "That's your problem," she said softly. "You still think this is about belief. It's about value." She turned to me again. "You see, Anna, when you've lived long enough in rooms like this, you start to forget the texture of genuine kindness. You start mistaking obedience for goodness. Tonight you reminded me that compassion still exists." I felt my throat tighten. "Thank you, Mrs. Huxley." "Please," she said gently, "call me Margaret. You've earned that much." Daniel stared at her, stunned. What do you mean she's earned?" Margaret turned her gaze on him, and the chill in her voice returned. If you wish to keep your place in this family, Daniel learned to see people for who they are, not what they wear. He looked away ashamed. Margaret reached for her cup again, her tone softening. Anna, I know this evening must have been overwhelming, but I hope you understand why I did it. I do, I said, and to my surprise I meant it. You wanted to know if I'd care when it wasn't convenient. She smiled a little sadly. Exactly, and now I know. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like an exhale, the end of something brittle giving way to truth. After a long moment, she said, "Shall we start over?" I nodded. I'd like that. She extended her hand across the table. I took it. Her grip was firm, her palm warm. The scarf between us felt like a bridge, soft and familiar. Daniel finally lifted his head, eyes wet with unspoken apologies. But before he could speak, his mother said quietly, "Dinner is served." And just like that, the tension broke. The butler opened the doors to reveal a second-course roast lamb, candles flickering down the table. The air felt lighter, warmer. As we sat again, Margaret glanced toward me. "You see, Anna," she said, her voice gentler. "Now the world has plenty of wealthy people. What it lacks is people with hearts that stay generous even when no one's watching." Her words stayed with me long after the last plate was cleared and the fire burned low. I didn't know it yet, but that night would become the turning point, not just for Daniel or for her, but for all of us. Dinner resumed, but nothing about it felt ordinary. The air in the vast dining room carried a different weight, now no longer tension but revelation. The firelight shimmered across the long mahogany table, throwing golden halos on the crystal glasses. Margaret Huxley, the woman who had terrified Daniel for years, was no longer just a symbol of wealth or judgment. She was human, piercingly so. I glanced at Daniel. He sat small in his chair, shoulders slumped, eyes darting between me and his mother like a man trying to understand a language he'd never learned. His fork scraped against the china. "I can't believe this," he muttered mostly to himself. Margaret didn't look up from her plate. "You've spent too many years believing all the wrong things." The butler cleared away the first course and replaced it with a small dish of lemon sorbet. The silence felt brittle like glass under pressure. Finally, Margaret placed her napkin neatly beside her plate and looked directly at her son. "Daniel," she said softly, "do you know why I stopped trusting your judgment years ago?" His voice cracked. "Because I married the wrong kind of woman." Her brow furrowed, faintly disappointed. "Because you stopped listening to your own conscience. You began living for appearances, mine society's, anyone's but your own." She turned toward me. "And you, Miss Walker, reminded me what character looks like." My throat tightened. I didn't mean to prove anything. "That's exactly why you did," she said. "It's the people who don't mean to who usually pass life's hardest tests." The room went still. For the first time since arriving, I felt warmth, not from the fire, but from her words. They sank deep, gentle, but unshakable. Daniel rubbed his temples, voice rising. "You've been testing everyone your whole life, Mother. Business partners, relatives, even me. No one can ever win with you." She nodded once. "That's true, because most people want to win for themselves, not for something greater. And that, my dear boy, is why they always fail." He stared at her, blinking rapidly. "And you think she's different?" Margaret smiled faintly. "I don't think. I know." Her certainty silenced him. I could feel his shame radiating across the table. For years, Daniel had been shaped by this woman's shadow, bent by her expectations, crushed by her silence. Tonight, that shadow finally lifted. Margaret leaned back, her gaze softening. "Do you remember what your father used to say?" she asked. Daniel hesitated. "That life is a competition." Her head tilted. "No," he said, "power without empathy is bankruptcy of the soul." You inherited his ambition, but not his wisdom. A tear slipped down Daniel's cheek. He wiped it away quickly, but not fast enough. Margaret's tone gentled. "Daniel, my tests weren't meant to break you. They were meant to wake you. The world won't remember your quarterly reports or dinner punctuality. It'll remember whether you were kind when it was inconvenient." He looked at her, then really looked, and for the first time that night, I saw the boy she had once loved, before fear had replaced affection. Margaret turned to me again. Anna, tell me about your work, the one he told you not to mention. I hesitated. Daniel looked mortified. Mother, please. It's all right, I said softly. I work for Connect Hope. We help veterans, single parents, anyone who's struggling to get back on their feet. Sometimes that means delivering groceries. Sometimes it's just listening. Margaret nodded slowly, genuine interest lighting her eyes. And how do you fund this organization? We rely on donations, grants, volunteers, I said. Mostly people who believe that compassion isn't weakness. She smiled at that. How refreshing. Then turning to Daniel, you see, my son. This is what strength looks like. The courage to care. Daniel's shoulders shook. His voice cracked. I was so afraid of disappointing you. I thought you wanted someone who'd fit your world. I wanted someone who'd change it, she said quietly. Her hand reached across the table and covered his. For the first time all evening, he didn't flinch. You've spent years chasing my approval, she continued. But approval is cheap. What I wanted was pride. He nodded faintly, eyes glistening. I understand now. She smiled sadly. Good. Then maybe you'll forgive me for how I've tested you all these years. He exhaled shakily. If you can forgive me for how easily I failed them. There was silence, long, heavy, and strangely peaceful. Margaret leaned back, her expression soft but resolute. You both remind me that it's never too late to choose the right measure of worth. The butler refilled her glass. She didn't touch it. Instead, she looked at me again. Anna, I hope you never change. The world doesn't need more perfect women. It needs women who still believe that kindness matters. I swallowed hard. Thank you, ma'am. That's the kindest thing anyone's ever said to me. Daniel looked at me, then a different look, one of awe and guilt and gratitude all tangled together. He whispered, I'm sorry. I reached across the table, gently touching his hand. So am I. Margaret rose, placing her napkin beside her plate. Well, she said lightly, I think that's quite enough honesty for one evening. A faint, warm laughter rippled through the room, the kind that follows years of silence finally breaking. As we stood, she glanced at me one more time. Anna, she said, if you ever tire of non-profit work, I could use someone like you in my foundation. It needs heart again. I smiled. Maybe someday. But I think the world still needs me where I am. Then stay, she said softly, and stay exactly as you are. She reached for her scarf, the one I'd given her, and placed it once more around her shoulders. Not all gifts are meant to be returned, she murmured almost to herself. For the first time, Daniel smiled, small but real. You kept it. I did, she said, to remind me that wealth only matters when it's warm. That line would stay with me for the rest of my life. The weeks that followed felt like a quiet sunrise after a long, sleepless night. The world outside the Huxley mansion moved on, but something inside each of us had shifted forever. Daniel called his mother the next morning, not to argue but to apologize. He told her he finally understood what she'd been trying to teach him all those years. She didn't say much in return, only that she hoped he'd start living by what he now claimed to understand. He did, slowly, awkwardly, but sincerely. For me, the days returned to their usual rhythm: early mornings at Connect Hope meetings with donors, home visits to veterans and struggling families. But everything looked different. The faces I met each day seemed brighter somehow, their small victories more profound. Kindness had always been my work. Now it felt like my calling. A month later, Margaret asked me to lunch, just the two of us. We met at a quiet cafe near the city's old courthouse, far from the marble halls of her mansion. She wore no jewelry, no pearls, no scarf, only a soft gray sweater that made her look almost ordinary. I never thanked you properly, she said as soon as we sat. I smiled. You don't have to. I do, she insisted. You reminded me that kindness isn't supposed to be strategic. Somewhere along the way I forgot that. She stirred her tea, thoughtful. When my husband died, the people around me divided into two kinds, those who wanted comfort and those who wanted my approval. I stopped trusting both. But that day in the grocery store, when you didn't know who I was, you gave me something I didn't realize I'd lost. What's that? I asked. Faith, she said quietly. That goodness still exists when no one's looking. We sat in comfortable silence. Outside, a man helped his elderly father into a taxi. Margaret's eyes followed them and softened. "Do you still have the scarf?" I asked with a small smile. She nodded. "Every night I hang it by my bedside. It reminds me that generosity doesn't always come wrapped in perfection." Her words warmed me more than the coffee in my hands. That weekend, Daniel and I went back to my hometown to visit my parents. They lived in a modest house filled with old photographs and the smell of baked bread. Daniel had always dreaded the idea before he'd worried my world would seem too simple. This time he couldn't stop talking with them. He listened to my father's stories, helped my mother fix her garden fence, and laughed for the first time in weeks. Late that evening, while we sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the trees, he turned to me and said softly, "You know, I thought my mother's approval was the only thing that mattered. But that night showed me something else." "What's that?" He smiled faintly. "You can't earn love by impressing people. You earn it by doing what's right when no one expects you to." I took his hand. For the first time, we were equals, not partners divided by class or fear, but two people trying to be better than they were yesterday. When our wedding day came, it wasn't at the Huxley estate. Margaret insisted on that. "Too cold," she'd said. Instead, we married in my parents' backyard beneath a canopy of string lights and autumn leaves. It was simple, quiet, and beautiful. Margaret arrived early wearing a navy blue dress, and of course the same cashmere scarf. She greeted every guest, smiled for every photograph, and cried softly during the vows. I caught her eye once as Daniel slipped the ring onto my finger. She mouthed the words, "You passed," and I almost laughed through my tears. After the ceremony, she stood to give a toast. Her voice, steady and graceful, carried over the small crowd. "There are moments in life," she said, "when we're asked to choose between what looks proper and what feels right." I used to believe that the world rewarded the proper. Now I know it remembers the right. She raised her glass toward me, to Anna, who reminded me that kindness, when given freely, has a way of coming home. The guests applauded, but I couldn't stop the lump rising in my throat. I reached up to touch the scarf draped over her shoulders and whispered, "Keep it." She smiled. "Oh, I intend to." That night, as the music faded and lanterns swayed in the cool breeze, I thought about everything that had led me there: the grocery store, the fear, the judgment, the revelation. We chase so many tests in life, the ones written on paper, the ones set by family, the ones that come disguised as chance encounters. But the only tests that matter are the ones we don't realize we're taking, the ones that measure our heart when no one else is watching. It's been years since that day, but every time I see someone struggle in a checkout line or shiver at a bus stop, I think of Margaret, of Daniel, and of that scarf. And I think of how a small act of kindness rewrote the story of an entire family. So, if you're listening to this story right now, maybe ask yourself, what would you have done in that grocery store? Would you have hurried past, or would you have stopped? Sometimes the simplest choice is the one that changes everything. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who believes in quiet goodness, the kind that doesn't need to be seen to matter. And remember, kindness doesn't ask for attention. It just asks to be done.